Hey everybody, it's your girl, Megan, coming to you from Under a Blanket, aka the best amateur podcasting setup we have in 2020. And that's what I kind of want this to be, is kind of like a little podcast, with some nature video. Apologies for the shaky cam. I was frequently startled by bugs that were trying to eat me, and I often tripped because I wanted to make sure I was getting a half-decent video on my phone. So shaky cam makes you kind of nauseous. I hear you. You don't have to watch the nature video if you don't want to. And maybe you can just put this on in the background while you eat your lunch and we can just have a nice little chat together, and I hope you enjoy it. So first of all, thank you to everyone who donated to the Prisoners' Rights Project GoFundMe. I will link the fundraiser in the post wherever the heck I end up putting this. And you can continue to donate and continue to share it with your friends because it's an ongoing project. And they're doing really, really important work, as I detailed in my posts. This is, there's never a good year to come out of incarceration, but this year is uniquely hard. It's that much harder to get a job, to find housing, all those things that are very obvious. So it's really important that we support people who are exiting the prison industrial complex on some level. We can get into that later. So please donate, please share, all that good stuff. So what I kind of want to talk about, in part I want to thank the folks who donated, give a little gift in return. What I also want to do is talk about how I came around to the concept of prison abolition as someone who loves people who have been harmed. So this isn't going to be Prison Abolition 101 or Transformative Justice 101. You should be talking to much smarter people than me about that. I'll recommend a few. My personal faves, Mariame, I think that's how you say her name, Kaba. I'll put their names in here. Robyn Maynard also talks specifically about the history and role of policing in Canada, which is great because I know America distracts our attention a lot of the time, for good reason and not so good reasons, but it is important to focus on what we can do here, while also keeping our minds on sort of the global angle of prison abolition. Also not specifically prison abolitionist, but Adrienne Marie Brown, awesome, great future visioning person. I don't even know how to describe her. Just go check out every single thing she does, every podcast she's on. I've only read her second book. Don't come for me. Also Sonya Renee Taylor. She talks about things in a really great way. I haven't read her book either. I'm bad, I know. But she's another one that just has some very, very wise words to say for now, in particular, as well as what justice looks like in a different world. And I highly recommend her Instagram and her semi-daily What's Up Y'all videos for just a little dose of wisdom and reality, which is what we all need at this point in our lives, I think. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, the whole thing is with prison abolition, whenever even those two words come up, people get a little freaked out. And I used to get a little freaked out, and I would have a very visceral response to that idea. Because I've always been one who's like, well, we shouldn't, this is talking from, baby Meghan in college, when she, first year of SSW, and my eyes were bright and shiny, and the world was a different place. I was like, well, we shouldn't punish people who have addiction, we should get them some help. And, stealing isn't so bad. Most people do it because they're poor, so we shouldn't put them in jail. But rapists and murderers definitely need to be in jail. Definitely. And that's a very gut reaction, and it's very understandable. How else are you supposed to react, especially if you know someone who's been assaulted in any way? God forbid someone who's been murdered. I'm not coming from a place of I pretend to understand what that feels like. I don't. And it's totally, revenge is a very human emotion. I think we've been acting on revenge. Oops, I just hit the table. Acting on revenge, feeling the need for revenge, since there's been 3 people in the world. You know what I mean? That's not a new thing. I totally get it. But, the I'll call it a panic that people kind of feel, because that's what it is. That's what I felt when I used to hear prison abolition, at all. Was what do we do about all the rapists and murderers? That's here's the thing. They're already out here. Sorry if you hear background noise. I did my best to sound dampen, but here we are. It's that's the gut reaction is, what do we do about all the rapists and murderers? But the thing is, they're out here already, especially when it comes to, rapists, child abusers, whatever label you want to put on that category. We know, we're very aware of how rare convictions are, and when there are convictions, how short the sentences are. So this idea that prison is where we put all the bad people, and the bad people stay there forever, and they don't hurt us anymore, it isn't true. It's factually untrue, especially in cases of, abuse, assault, all those sort of things. Like, let's just get real for a second. As much as a lot of us are fascinated by serial killers, and I understand the impulse, it's a very human impulse to be fascinated by what disturbs us. But the Russell Williams, the Ted Bundys, the BTKs, the Karla Homolkas, those are outliers. They are not common. Like I would say even most murder cases are usually, second degree crimes of passion committed in the act of doing something. There's usually other factors. The really scary people that get 25 books written about them and half-season CBC special, done on them are very, very not the norm. I'm not saying we shouldn't have ways to handle them and that we shouldn't have ways of protecting people, and I don't necessarily know what those ways look like, but I think we can imagine them together as a society, especially as the world is building itself anew one way or the other. That's what 2020 is teaching us, I think. And a lot of other people think, at least. So I think there's other ways than just, build a concrete box and put them all in there. And especially, like I just said, when it comes to things like abuse, sexual abuse, things like that, if they do go in there, they don't stay in there very long. And we've seen so many cases with, especially stalking. I find stalking cases very, very disturbing. I can't, a single incident of trauma or an abusive relationship that starts and ends over a certain period, that's traumatic enough by itself, For something like these cases that go on for years and years and they consume every moment of your day and you're always worried about your safety, and that can happen with abusive relationships too. There's a lot of, there's no neat categories in life. Those I find really disturbing, and guess what? The police and the prison system are really bad at handling those cases, and unfortunately what happens is that their victims often get hurt. Even though we have these big concrete boxes that we put people in allegedly to keep the rest of us, I'm using air quotes, but you can't see me, the rest of us safe. So what really are they for? And like I said, not Prison Abolition 101. We know what they're for. It's an extension of racism and white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, whatever the hell you want to call it. This mess that we found ourselves in, that's what it's an extension of. And again, read and talk to people smarter than me about this, but I'm just talking about how I came around to it. As someone who loves people who've been harmed, I'm purposefully talking about this in vague terms because these stories are not my stories, and I'm not about to share them on the internet for the entertainment of some of my Facebook friends. So, thing is, when I say, the Russell Williams and that type of people of the world are very rare, they are. Serial killers are not actually common, despite how much of Netflix's library they occupy. But sexual abuse and abuse in general is very common. And people like to say, I don't think people do this in an unkind way. I think it's well-intentioned but very misguided. Try to say it's that doesn't happen very often, people shouldn't be so paranoid about everything. And I know just saying that out loud is triggering some of you that are listening to this. It's triggering to me too, but I want to acknowledge that I don't think everyone who says that is trying to minimize the pain of others. They're dealing with a reality that isn't everyone else's reality, and they're having trouble conceptualizing, the fact that the world can be a really, really ugly place sometimes, unfortunately. If I were to tell you of all the people I know and I love and I count in my personal circle of people Meghan likes, how many of those people have been assaulted or abused, you would be duly startled by that number. I'm not going to say it again because I respect people's privacy, but I think you would be a bit alarmed if you're one of those people who that hasn't been your reality. And to be clear, it hasn't been mine. I've had street harassment and things like that, but I'm not a survivor, put it that way. So, and the thing about that is, again, talking about what do we do with the rapists? It's some rapists and abusers are out there walking around today, and they don't know that's what they are. I can think of one case in particular where I know for a fact that the person who hurt the person I love has no idea what they did. No idea. And that's because the conversation in our culture around consent and what sexuality is supposed to look like and what sex looks like and all those other things is so bad and so ill-informed and so cluttered with all this nonsense, because God forbid we just sit teenagers down and give them factual information about a thing that most of them will be doing on a regular basis. Like, sorry to tangent here, but I heard so much about marijuana and cocaine and meth for all of grade 9. I'm probably not going to do a line of coke anytime soon. No shade to those who do, like recovery, drug use, there's a lot of nuances with that. All my love to my friends struggling with addiction, especially this year. But, like, probably not going to do a line of cocaine. Probably not going to take up meth. Sexuality, whether you're asexual or gay or straight or anything like that, it's going to play a factor in your life in some fashion. And you need to, regardless of what kind of sex you're going to have with whom, and when, and how often, and where, not so much where, I guess, but anyways, it's a necessary conversation. So that's step number 1, in Meghan's humble opinion. We need to have a better conversation about what sex is and stop letting kids learn it from Pornhub, to put it bluntly. Should put a warning on the beginning of this podcast. Don't listen with your family in the room. You might have to answer some questions. So the question from then, sorry, I keep hitting the table. The question from there is, what do we do with them? If we're not going to put them in jail, like, I think we all, if you're listening, if you're friends with me and you're listening to this, you're probably already of the mindset that, like, putting people in jail for shoplifting and for struggling with addiction and poverty, or for, driving while black, or existing while black, or existing while indigenous, all bad ideas. I think we're probably all on the same page with that, so I'm not going to linger on that. If you're not on the same page, again, I refer you to the citations I will be including with this video. But it begs the question, what do we do about people that cause real harm like that? I don't have an answer for the serial killers. Like I said, that's very, gonna need to come up with some kind of solution for that. Don't know what it'll look like. When it comes to rapists and abusers, I'm also going to refer everyone to the article. It's called How One Woman Reimagined Justice for Her Rapist. It's by Vivian Fairbank. It was in The Walrus, a great Canadian magazine. And I read it, and it was so interesting. And I, like, if you're triggered, don't push yourself to read it. But I do recommend that everyone else do, because it's such an interesting look at what actually going through the court process is like for a sexual assault or abuse survivor, and how re-traumatizing it is, and also how little it offers the victim and the abuser in the end, how little it does to actually mend the harm that's been done. So that talked about a woman going through a transformative justice process, and I won't spoil it because I think you should read it, but by the end of it, I don't think her abuser is going to reoffend, which that's always the thing, is like, we don't want recidivism, we don't want people to reoffend, like, obviously not, especially when it comes to, hurting people, hurting children especially, like, we want that to stop, obviously. Most, least coolest take of the year, abuse is bad, so, like, how do we mend the harm? How do we make people understand the harm that they've done? Because I think there's some awful repeat offenders out there, and I don't know what we'll do with them, but we'll have to find a solution that keeps them away from their victims, without just chucking them in a concrete box. Because here's the thing, when we chuck them in a concrete box, we're giving them access to a new crop of victims who are much more vulnerable and have even fewer resources to protect themselves and get justice. And, like, that's the truth. Like, we know, again, all of the trigger warnings for this podcast thing that I'm doing. Like, trans women end up in men's prisons all the time, and that's so wrong and so dangerous, and I hate even thinking about it, but it's a thing we have to address. And, like, we know, there's jokes about how often sexual assault happens in prison, and that's what we wish on people, these awful people who go into prison, and it's like, I totally understand that impulse. I understand it on an intimate level, even though I'm not a survivor myself. Like, I get it, but that's not, as someone who's opposed to the death penalty also, because I don't think killing someone because they killed someone else is a win. You know what I mean? I don't think basically sentencing someone to be assaulted and abused actually provides justice for either the abuser or the survivor, or survivors, because often abusers have multiple victims, which is another thing we have to grapple with and understand. Although I think we're getting better at understanding it since the Catholic Church scandal with the abusive priest getting moved around. So that, I think that conversation's already happening. So that's a good thing, even though it's a difficult topic. So it's, and again, like, a lot of transformative justice practitioners are folks who are indigenous, because, you know, Turtle Island, before white people showed up, there were no prisons, and they had to find other ways to deal with the problems, because stereotyping indigenous people like everything was peaceful and there was no conflict. It's no. There's been conflict and there's been problems since there's been people, and probably even before we were people. I mean, have you ever seen, like, what's our closest relatives, chimps or gorillas? Either way, if you observe them for long enough, they get into fights. And they have nonverbal arguments about things. So there's ways to sort out problems in our society that don't involve concrete boxes. So I think we really need to look at that, because the concrete box system is not getting us anywhere. The carceral system is not moving us forward as a society. And I think this year is telling us that we need to do things differently, at the very minimum. Again, please go listen to Sonya, Renee Taylor's What's Up, Y'alls, and then if you need a come down, go listen to all of Adrienne Marie Brown's podcasts, and then I think you'll hopefully be in the same mental place I am now, which is admittedly terrified, but moving in a positive direction and doing good things despite all of the other things. That's not really what this podcast is about, so I'll just dip right out of there. So I don't know, there's no one. We gotta get out of the savior mentality. That, like, as much as I love the people I'm recommending, there's no one person that has all the answers for every situation. The whole thing behind transformative justice, I think, from what I saw on prison abolition, is that there has to be multiple solutions, and there has to be unique solutions for every community, for every case. This sort of rubber stamp, throw them all away, that sort of thing. Kind of like with garbage. Like, when we throw people away, they don't really go away. They just go somewhere else where we don't have to see them and think about them and consider what's happening. So I think we need to grapple with that a little bit. More than a little bit. But you know what I mean. Gonna bring up something, since I mentioned serial killers a few times, probably know what's coming. If you know me in my personal life, and you're listening to this, you might be going like, but Megan, you love true crime so much. You've spent almost every day of this pandemic working from home, listening to true crime podcasts in lieu of normal human interaction. And I would say, yes, random person, you are entirely correct. That is what I have been doing. But here's a couple things about this. So, as opposed to when I was younger, I have my focus a little more tailored now. I do still love forensic files, we all have. Here's the thing about guilty pleasures, like, Lindsay Ellis said it best, like, colonialism and all the other bad things of the world are baked into the fabric of every single element of our global society. There's no escaping. Like, all your faves are problematic. Everything you like is problematic in some way. And you can love something rigorously while acknowledging its problematic elements and staying away from stuff that does more harm than good, put it that way. And you have to decide to love some things, and you have to have interests and enjoy things, in spite of their problematic elements, because everything is made by problematic people. I feel qualified to say that as someone with a Hobbit tattoo. Put it that way. So, but as an adult, I have tailored my focus a little more, and my interests lie in true crime media that focuses, number one, on the victim stories. My Favorite Murder is the first one that I'm a pretty passionate listener of, and their thing, they said it in the Raina Marroquin episode. That was the Body in the Barrel Forensic Files episode, if that clicks in for anybody. They talked about how, like, that case where this woman had been missing for 35 years, they finally found her body, and they were able to get her body back to her mom in Venezuela, and it's sort of like, that was, the important part of that story was not, like, tracking down her killer and what he did and what he didn't do. Another thing, quick aside, like, I'm not into true crime that shows photos and gory details, and, like, if, like, I try to love everybody like all the books say, but if you're into that, I'm a little worried for you, just like, a little. But I still love you, it's okay. But the thing with that, that particular episode, like, what they kept saying was, like, everybody matters. Like, this woman who died mattered, her mom mattered, and she deserved to have those answers, at the very least. Other people have said it's like, once someone's been killed, like, justice for Breonna Taylor would be her still being alive and living her life. Like, once she's dead, that there's a certain element of justice we'll never get back. So that's kind of my focus in true crime stories now. I am still interested in like the sciencey stuff. That's why I like Forensic Files, although I acknowledge it can be misused. There's some good documentaries about that, like the use of teeth marks. There was a good documentary on Netflix about that, and how many black men got put in prison for crimes they didn't commit. That was cool. It can also be used in the other way, like the Innocence Project, freeing so many black men with DNA evidence. Thank God they're out of, they never, again, that, they'll never get those years back. There's an element of justice they will never achieve, but at least they're out now, and they didn't die in there, thank God. So those are kind of my priorities: victim story, sciences. Also sort of why cases didn't get solved, why were they ignored, e.g. Robert Pickton, because so many of his victims were sex workers, and were indigenous, and some of them were drug users. It's like, nobody cared enough to put the patterns together. Well, not nobody, their families certainly cared, and a lot of community members certainly cared, but, the people with the resources, aka the police, didn't care until it was far too late, unfortunately. So that's my area of interest now, as an adult who's into true crime. So my favorite murder is the one I kind of recommend. And they've grown over the years. Like, initially they were very, like, chuck all the bad guys in jail, longer sentences, mandatory minimums. But they've really listened to their community, and they've come around to, oh no, this has a lot more nuance than I thought it did. Kind of what I've been talking about all along. This has a lot more nuance. There's things about the prison industrial complex that do not work, that do not protect people, and they use their platform for good. They've been calling for justice, for Breonna Taylor and others. They've, drawn their attention to unsolved cases. They're encouraging people to vote, all that good thing. They're using their platform in a very positive way. The other podcast I recommend is Dark Poutine. It's a Canadian one. They cover true crime cases, but they also cover dark history. And for two white guys, I gotta say, they do a great job being aware of their biases, calling out the way that women are mistreated, the way indigenous people, black people, people of color are mistreated, especially in police investigations, how those cases go ignored and unsolved, and even if they make it to trial, they rarely get a conviction for all kinds of reasons. They talk about that really openly, and they've covered, for their kind of more history-focused episodes, they've talked about Africville, they've talked about the Kobayata Maru incident, they've talked about a whole bunch of things, so I really recommend them. And they also have a very victim focus, not about the gory details, not about let's get inside the mind of the killer, none of that. Like, they're very about the story, and about, sort of just, I think when you tell someone's story, it's a way of keeping them alive, in some sense. That whole, like, very cheesy thing of, like, you die twice, the first time when you take your last breath, and the second time when, the last time your name is spoken, or whatever. I think that's a set of song lyrics, and I'm too old to be quoting song lyrics, even though I'm not at all old. I'm not calling myself old, don't stress. But yeah, I also recommend them, and both of them, again, not to talk about someone else's stories, but they put this out there. They've both experienced abuse in their own lives and their own struggles, and they're really open about that, and that, I think, for lack of a better word, it informs the way that they tell the story. So if you love true crime and care about justice, there's a way to do both. I think there's a way to ethically enjoy true crime and appreciate those darker impulses without forgetting the very real cost of crime and what happens afterwards. And I think that's what gets forgotten. I haven't talked too much about the experiences of the folks who are being helped by the Prisoners' Rights Project right now, because I feel vastly unqualified to do so. I recommend checking out Project F Word on Instagram, other social medias. It's called the Forgiveness Project. They're what brought me around in a significant way to sort of this cause, and what drew my attention to the Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project and their GoFundMe. They do some really excellent work with people who are currently in the prison system and people who are exiting the prison system. And one thing they did, they had a letter writing event, which was super cool. I hope they do one soon. I will definitely post it if they do, because I think it's an excellent project. It has a real tangible impact. Policy change is really essential for moving forward. Policy change and a lot of other things. There's a lot of paths to a lot of different futures, but I'm not here to get all wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey on you. But the one thing that, we can offer people who are incarcerated is genuine human connection, because that is so very lacking in the prison system, and COVID has just made that so much worse. They've cut off visitors, which, like, I get it, but also, you know, if we can all go to the grocery store, people should be able to go sit 6 feet apart from their family member in the visiting area, you know what I mean? So that's a separate conversation, but the two things that really stuck out for me from that letter writing event. There were 2 young men speaking, both who were recently, had just exited prison. One was staying in a halfway house, one was staying, I think, with some family members. And the one young man talked about how when he would get mail, it didn't matter who it was from, he'd get a letter, and he'd take it back to his cell, and he'd read one sentence and then, like, look away, and then read it again, and then read the next sentence, and then wait, because he just wanted to savor that experience of finally having stimulation and just knowing that someone cared about him enough to write to him, even if it was a stranger. And that was just, like, you know, that's when I stopped letting people joke about being in prison, because it was, you know, this was back in the quarantine days. We still are in quarantine, but this was back in June where it was a bit worse. That's why I was like, no, we can't make that joke anymore. Nope, not funny, because we've got Netflix and Zoom chats, and there's people who are trying to savor the experience of reading a 1-page letter, because that's how desperate they are for human kindness and any kind of intimate contact beyond, like, prison guards and cellmates. Like, holy Jesus. And the other thing that stuck with me, from those young men's stories, they had a lot to say. They were really wonderful. The one young man talked about how the very first thing he did, as soon as he got out, the first day, he went to a park in Toronto, when you could go to parks in Toronto, and he just sat on a bench and just stayed there, and just sat there and looked at the birds and the trees, and the way he talked about how he was so excited to just be outside and not be in anymore, and it was, yeah, that's why I decided to do the nature walk, because I don't want to turn this into some kind of inspiration porn, because that's really gross, where it's like, well, these people have hard lives, so I should feel better about the things I have. No, bad. Look, Google inspiration porn. Not at work, in case you get some weird results, but just look up the meaning of the term inspiration porn and why it's problematic, and why we need to connect with each other's humanity rather than reducing other people's hardships to little inspiring memes for ourselves to get through our day at work, or something like that. So just to clarify. But yeah, that left a really significant impact on me, and, you know, I think we should all be engaging more with that, because again, like I said before, prison is kind of a place to throw people away and pretend that they're not people anymore, and that's not solving any of the problems that we're claiming to try and be solving. So I think the more we connect with people who are incarcerated or have been incarcerated as people, that's I think the biggest step we can take in the right direction. IMHO. So yeah, like I said, please share the Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project's GoFundMe. As of their last posting, they've received requests for, I believe it's $166,000 is the total amount of requests they've received. Currently, the GoFundMe is around $140,000, so every little bit counts, and it's going, you know, it's going right into the pockets of people who are getting out of prison and their families, and they're just trying to survive. And I think that's the most important thing, because I could probably make a whole other podcast about the nonprofit industrial complex, even though I work in it, and I don't think it's all bad. You know, it's not like there's not good work being done, but forever and always the best thing is to put money in the hands of people who are affected by all these social problems that we like to talk about. That's 100% always the best thing. Give them the money and let them make decisions about their lives like the rest of us do, and let them survive. Like, period. That is my hot take for today. Alrighty, so as we come to the end of this video/podcast, I hope you are all doing well. Please stay safe, please take care of yourselves, and please do check out the links in the post attached to this video, share them around, and especially share the GoFundMe. Alright, much love to everyone, stay safe, stay sane, be better, do better, and enjoy the best Western. Love ya!